Hello, welcome to our live broadcast series. And today's video, we're going to be addressing the question, what is a healing reaction? Now, I'll remind you, if you want to ask a question and you're watching live, please just enter your question into the comment box below. Or if you're watching this as a replay, likewise, I will look at the comments and feed those into future videos as things to be addressed. So as I mentioned, today's topic is the question, what is a healing reaction? And actually, there will be two parts to this. Obviously, part one will be right now, and I will conclude with part two next week. So give me a second. I'm just going to switch over to my slides. Okay, here we go. Yeah, what is a healing reaction? And as I ask that question, I'm reminded that many of our patients, when they're starting, if they've maybe heard something about the sequential timeline treatment and our therapies in general, they may have heard something about healing reactions, and often, maybe too often, they maybe are feeling apprehensive or frightened about that. And I'm hoping to dispel that in this video. Once you understand what it is and what's going on, there's very little to be afraid of, really. Now, we will get to that more into part two of the video, in the practical side, what to do if you're in a more overwhelming or intense reaction. We have a whole bunch of strategies for that. But at least for today, to get the broader concept and to really get to understanding what is happening, what's going on with the healing reaction and what it means, I think it will dispel a lot of those fears and anxieties that patients may bring to treatment. So the first thing I would point out is that what a healing reaction is not. I guess it's often easy to define something at first by saying what it's not. And in this case, and this is a common misconception, healing reaction is not a side effect. And specifically what I mean is, when I use the word side effect, of course, we're talking about the pharmaceutical drug and the side effects that causes in the human organism. And the way I explain this here, two main points. One is that, first of all, when you're not dealing with the homeopathic principle of similars, like cures like, when you're not using that, which is most of allopathic medicine, you're basically, as I say here, there's a lot of leftover. In other words, since there isn't that high degree of similarity between the drug image and the disease image, in other words, they're not finding that very nice overlap with each other, where they're practically tracing the shape of each other nearly perfectly. When you don't have that, you have a lot of overlap. And with that, and that overlap, the leftover energy in that sense of that, where the drug has a very different nature or character from the disease being treated, all of that leftover energy is what goes into producing the side effect. So that's one way of thinking about it, and that's correct. The other side of it, when you're dealing in the allopathic world, in those prescriptions and everything, you're generally dealing with doses of a large, crude nature, meaning that they're of this purely material nature, which the liver, the kidneys, all the detox organs in the body has to actively process that and discharge that from the system. So for those two reasons, we're getting side effects, generally as a rule of thumb, pretty much as a standard when you're dealing with pharmaceutical drugs. But none of this has to do with what a healing reaction is. I just wanted to get this out of the way when a lot of people merge those two terms together in their mind, and they're actually not the same thing. So the other main concept to kind of orient us, and this goes back to things we've talked about in previous videos, every remedy, in fact, even pharmaceutical drugs, but every homeopathic remedy that we want to focus on has a duality of action. And that's like in physics, where the principle is, for every action, there is an opposite but equal reaction. And we could apply pretty much the same sentiment to the homeopathic remedy, where we have that duality of medicinal action. We have first the initial action, and then afterwards there's the secondary action. So there's the duality of action. The other main concept to understand when we're talking about a healing reaction is the core Heilkunst idea of the direction of cure. And as you may recall in a previous video we've done, when we talked about the three possible outcomes of a medicine, it can either be curative, it can be palliative, or it can be suppressive. So for the sake of explaining the direction of cure, we can talk, the direction we're talking about is within the human organism. Disease is either moving further inward, it's further penetrating into the organism, or it's moving further outward. So in the case of cure, that's what we're talking about, the inside out direction, or the disease moving further outward so that it's less and less affecting the more vital organs, what Hahnemann called the organs of greater nobility. You've got to love his very poetic language. And then the opposite of that, the suppression, as I mentioned, was where the disease is burrowing deeper inside the organism, or even worse, that's what the disease does on its own accord. When we have a suppressive approach to medicine, it further enhances the goal of the disease. It's burrowing deeper into those organs of greater nobility, as Hahnemann poetically said. So again, think of these two directions: either it's driving further to the inside, or it's being driven to the outside in the permanent curative direction, which is where we want it. We don't want it inside of us. We want to send it out. Another, earlier I differentiated between the term between healing reaction and a side effect. I was differentiating that. And here within our homeopathic prescribing, I want to differentiate two terms that also get mixed up. And that's the difference between a homeopathic aggravation, comparing that with a healing reaction, which is the main thing we want to talk about here. So the homeopathic, and back to this duality of action, the primary action or the initial action, and then the counter action or the secondary action. These two, depending on which one is dominant, we're going to get more of one or the other kind of reaction or kind of output from it. So in the homeopathic aggravation, that relates to the initial action of the medicine. So that's when the medicine and the disease meet within the human organism. When we're in the case of an acute disease, that's where we're most going to notice this initial action. That's where those the characteristics of the medicine, which are similar to the disease, that all meets, and that actually increases whatever that acute flare-up was at the moment, whatever that acute disease expression was, that's going to be exacerbated momentarily in the initial action. And the healing reaction, the real thing we're defining today, that we will tend to see more of that when we're dealing with a long-standing chronic disease. And what's happening in the healing reaction, that's where the counteraction of the medicine is more matching what the expression of that chronic disease is. So all the symptoms that somebody has, because of their chronic disease, those symptoms are actually the body producing those as a counteraction to the disease itself. So when we get to the second action of the medicine, that's what matches those disease symptoms of the chronic disease, and that's where we're going to see more of an exacerbation. Now, that's a good thing. This is the whole point of today's talk. The healing reaction is a very positive thing, because what's happening there is the body is now successfully pushing all of the disease matter out. I say disease matter, that can be physical toxins and so on. It can also be mental and emotional content as well. So, old mental or emotional traumas that have happened as part of the healing reaction, those can be pushed out. So whether that comes out in terms of memories or dreams or any psychological content like that, that can be part of the healing reaction as well. And the one note I make at the bottom of this slide is the majority of healing reactions are quite mild and barely noticeable. So I emphasize that just to remove the freak out factor. When a healing reaction is bigger, it's for good reason. The body needs to do that level of detox, but most of the time it barely makes a mark on the person's awareness or on their radar screen. So you're probably something like, let's say 85 or 90% of healing reactions are barely, if at all, noticeable, and then those 5 or 10% are the ones that really kind of sit you up, bolt upright in your chair, and really get your attention, figuratively speaking. A general framework to understand about the healing reaction, about the homeopathic remedies in general, their activity in the body, I talked about that initial action and the counteraction, the duality of action. But overall, the completion of a remedy activity, both sides of it, follows that 28-day lunar cycle. So that's quite typical. Of course, there's slight fluctuations of timing depending on someone's physiology and other factors and things like that. But it's very, very much like that very familiar 28-day lunar cycle that women are familiar with their menstrual cycle. And again, that will have slight variations, 29, 30 days, what have you. It'll vary a little bit, but it's roughly following the rhythms and the energy of the moon, that lunar cycle. So men have that well, and this is particularly where we see it in men, is in that following the cycle of the homeopathic remedy. Now, as far as the healing reaction goes, the peak activity of the healing reaction tends to be somewhere in the middle, somewhere around that 10 to 14 days after the remedy was first taken, is when you're going to see that more dramatic, intense peak of the healing reaction. Now, again, just like the 28 days can vary a little bit, slightly more, slightly less. Same thing with that 10 to 14 days peak of the healing reaction. For a variety of reasons, that can come sooner, that can come later. For physiological reasons in a person, for reasons of the particular disease we're treating. All these other variables will shift that, but the dominance of the bell curve, so to speak, is within that 10 to 14 days where we're going to see most of the more noticeable reactions, or will be in that window of time. This is actually an interesting topic. I'll probably cover this in a more full expansion and a video on its own, but I wanted to put it in here in this context of the healing reaction, and that's the general Heilkunst idea of occurrence. And all that word means, what an occurrent is the things that are happening to us, our life circumstances, our, the events that happen, whether bad or good. We get into a fender bender with our car, or good things happen. We meet certain people at certain times, or certain events happen in our life. We get a new job, we get a raise, whatever positive thing we're looking for in our life. All these events, they're no accidents, is really the point here. Things happen to us, as I say, for the good or the bad. And of course, I noticed a spelling mistake as I'm talking. I'm just going to fix that. Yeah, good or bad, all the things that happen to us are no accidents, but they are a function of our whole, like the whole energetic structure of us, and how that's contained, given the nature of our force field at a given point in time. And the reason I wanted to put this into this presentation on healing reactions is when we are going through those healing reactions, we're going through our timeline, taking those remedies. As we're doing that, of course, everything I've said happens in the healing reaction and the 28 days and all this. But in the process of all that, our force field is modified, it gets altered, more towards the good, of course. This is the nature of the remedies and the healing reaction. Things are moving in a more positive direction. And as part of the healing reaction, we can notice a different nature of some of our occurrence, certain things that happen. And actually, we'll see examples like this a lot. If we're clearing a particular thing on someone's timeline in that given month, the occurrence that could come up may be very directly or kind of symbolically related to what the content of that timeline event is, whether it was a physical event, whether it was again an emotional event. We may, we see this all the time. Examples where people talk about, oh yeah, they, totally out of the blue, when they were clearing this certain event from their timeline, they actually ran into this person who was this key person of that timeline event or that time of their life, and they kind of have a bit of a healing encounter with that person. Maybe they get to sit down and have coffee with the person, kind of hash over whatever that relationship was about between them. They may not have seen this person in years, but all of a sudden, boom, there they are, like right in the middle of the healing reaction. So this concept of occurrence I'm including here because it is part of the healing reaction. But as I say, I will probably do a fuller treatment of this concept on a video on its own in the future. So the last thing, so given we have all of that, we have our 28 days, we have our initial action, our healing reaction, We have, all the anatomy that I've laid out here. So that's just anatomy, or that's just the mechanics of everything. But the ultimate thing to keep your mind on, as you kind of come out of healing reaction, is really the point of it all. The point of the remedies, the point of the cure, the point of the healing is really where you go as a person. Where you become more fully integrated. You bring into play, all the pieces of who you are. They become more integrated into your whole being. Again, whether that's physical, whether that's emotional, we can talk about, tissue damage being repaired and the cells of the body, coming into more of a state of wholeness. Whatever the example is, this is my point here, is this is if we're following a map, this is ultimately where we're going on this whole journey of the remedy and the healing reaction, is this ultimate completion, or driving you towards further completion of who you are, how you function, how your cells, your mind, how everything functions. And of course, that's the meaning of the word to heal or healing. It's rooted in that word wholeness. The whole of course operates above and beyond the parts. It's kind of an entity unto itself, independent of how the parts behave on their own. So that's the end of the formal part of the presentation. And as I said, please feel free to enter any comments. I'm happy to address them right now, or vice versa. If you are watching this as a replay after the fact, I will entertain questions in a future video. And please stay tuned next week when we get into part 2. We're going to do the concluding part of this video, and we're going to get more into the practical side. If you are experiencing a healing reaction, if you have taken a remedy and you suspect any of these kinds of things are going on, oops, and I completely forgot to bring myself on the screen. Hello. You can feel free to answer your questions. I will happily address those. I will end this video in a moment, but I will give it a few seconds in case anyone was typing. I know there's a bit of a delay, but that is all for the formal presentation today. So thank you for joining me, and we will conclude this next week with part 2.